Good morning, everyone. I got quite a bombshell video in the works right now, and it's gonna basically answer every question that people have about everything that's going on. I wanted to compile everything, but I um I wanted to read this article in full and put it out there, um, just briefly. So, in my investigation, um, I discovered this. The Order of Skull and Bones. Everything you always wanted to know, but were afraid to ask. Secret Origins of Skull and Bones. The story begins at Yale, where three threads of American social history espionage, drug smuggling, and secret societies intertwine into one. Elihu Yale was born near Boston, educated in London, and served with the British East India Company, eventually becoming governor of Fort St. George, Madras, in 1687. He amassed a great fortune from trade and returned to England in 1699. Yale became known as quite a philanthropist. Upon receiving a request from the Collegiate School at Connecticut, he sent a donation and gift of books. After subsequent bequests, Cotton Mather suggested that he be named the college Yale in 1718. A statue of Nathan Hale stands on Old Campus at Yale University. There is a copy of that statue in front of the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and yet another stands in front of Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where George H.W. Bush went to prep school and joined a secret society at the age of 12. Nathan Hale, along with three other Yale graduates, was a member of the Culper Ring, one of America's first intelligence operations. Established by George Washington, it was successful throughout the Revolutionary War. Nathan was the only operative to be ferreted out by the British, and after speaking his famous regrets, he was hanged in 1776. Ever since the founding of the Republic, the relationship between Yale and the intelligence community has been unique. In 1823, Samuel Russell established Russell and Company for the purpose of acquiring opium in Turkey and smuggling it to China. Russell and Company merged with Perkins, Boston, syndicate in 1830 and became the primary American opium smuggler. Many of the great American and European fortunes were built on the China opium trade. Now, Russell is basically the person who started Skull and Bones in Yale. But we'll get to that. In 1823, one of Russell and Company's chief of operations in Canton was Warren Delano, Jr., grandfather of Franklin Roosevelt. Other Russell partners included John Cleve Green, who financed Princeton, Abiel Lowe, who financed construction of Columbia, and Joseph Coolidge in the Perkins, Sturgis, and Forbes family. Coolidge's son organized the United Fruit Company, and his grandson Archibald C. Coolidge was a co-founder of the Council on Foreign Relations. William Huntington Russell, Samuel's cousin, studied in Germany from 1831 to 32. Germany was a hotbed of new ideas. The scientific method was being applied to all forms of human endeavor. Prussia, which blamed the defeat of its forces by Napoleon in 1806 on soldiers only thinking about themselves and the stress of battle, took the principles set forth by John Locke and Jean Rousseau and created a new educational system. Johann Fichte, in his address to the German people, declared that the children would be taken over by the state and told what to think and how to think it. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel took over Fichte's chair at the University of Berlin in 1817 and was a professor there until his death in 1831. Hegel was the culmination of the German idealistic philosophy school of Immanuel Kant. To Hegel, our world is a world of reason, the state is absolute reason, and the citizen can only become free by worship and obedience to the state. Hegel called the state the march of God in the world, and the final end. This final end, Hegel said, has supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state. Both fascism and communism have their philosophical roots in Hegelianism. Hegelian philosophy was very much in vogue during William Russell's time in Germany. When Russell returned to Yale in 1832, he formed a senior society with Alphonso Taft. According to the information acquired from a break in the tomb, the Skull and Bones Meeting Hall, in 1876, Bones is a chapter of a corps in a German university. General Russell, its founder, was in Germany before his senior year and formed a warm friendship with a leading member of a German society. He brought back with him to college authority to found a chapter here. So class valedictorian William H. Russell, along with 14 others, became the founding members of the Order of Skull and Bones, later changed to the Order of Skull and Bones. The secretive Order of Skull and Bones only exists at Yale. 15 juniors are tapped each year by the seniors to be initiated into next year's group. Some say each initiative is given $15,000 and a grandfather clock. Far from being a campus funhouse, the group is geared more towards the success of its members in the post-collegiate world. The family names on the Skull and Bones roster roll off the tongue like an elite party list. Lord Whitney, Taft, J. Bundy, Harriman, Weyerhaeuser, Pinchot, Rockefeller, Goodyear, Sloan, Stimson, Phelps, Perkins, Pillsbury, Kellogg, Vanderbilt, Bush, Lovett, and so on. William Russell went on to become a general and a state legislator in Connecticut. Alphonso Taft was appointed U.S. Attorney General, Secretary of War, a post many bonesmen have held, ambassador to Austria, and ambassador to Russia. Another post held by many bonesmen, his son, William Howard Taft, is the only man to be both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Secrets of the Tomb. The order flourished from the very beginning in spite of occasional squalls of controversy. There was dissension from some professors who didn't like its secrecy and exclusiveness, and there was backlash from students showing concern about the influence Bones was having over Yale finances and the favoritism shown to Bonesmen. In October of 1873, Volume 1, Number 1 of the Iconoclast was published in New Haven. It was only published once and was a very openly published article on the Order of Skull and Bones. From the Iconoclast. We speak through a new publication because the college press is closed to those who dare to openly mention Bones. Out of every class, Skull and Bones takes its men. They have gone out into the world and have become in many instances leaders in society. They have obtained control of Yale. Its business is performed by them. Money paid to the college must pass into their hands and be subject to their will. No doubt they are worthy men in themselves, but the many whom they look down upon while in college cannot so far forget as to give money freely into their hands. Men in Wall Street complain that the college comes straight to them for help instead of asking each graduate for his share. The reason is found in a remark made by one of Yale's and America's first men. Few will give but bonesmen, and they care for more than their society than they do for their college. Year by year, the deadly evil is growing. The society was never as obnoxious to the college as it is today. And it is just this ill feeling that shuts the pockets of non-members. Never before has it shown such arrogance and self-fancied superiority. It grasps the college press and endeavors to rule it all. It does not deign to show its credentials, but clutches at power with the silence of conscious guilt. To tell the good which Yale College has done would be well nigh impossible. To tell the good she might do would be yet more difficult. The question then is reduced to this. On the one hand lies a source of incalculable good. On the other, a society guilty of serious and far-reaching crimes. It is Yale College against Skull and Bones. We ask all men as a question of right which should be allowed to live. At first, the society held its meetings in hired halls. Then in 1856, the Tomb, a vine-covered windowless brownstone hall, was constructed, where to this day bonesmen hold their strange occultish initiation rites and meet each Thursday and Sunday. On September 29, 1876, a group calling itself the Order of File and Claw broke into the Skull and Bones Holy of Holies. In the tomb, they found a lodge room 324 fitted up in black velvet. Even the walls were being covered with the material. Upstairs was lodge room 322, the sanctum sanctorum of the temple, furnished in red velvet, with a pentagram on the wall. In the hall are pictures with a pentagram on the wall. In the hall are pictures of the founders of Bones at Yale and of members of the society in Germany. When the chapter was established here in 1832, the raiding party found another interesting scene in the parlor next to room 322. From the Fall of the Skull and Bones. On the west wall, hung among other pictures, an old engraving represented open burial vault, in which, on a stone slab, rest 4 human skulls, grouped about a fool's cap and bells and an open book, several mathematical instruments, a beggar's script, and a royal crown. On the arched wall above the vault are explanatory words in Roman letters. We war der Thor, were Weiser, were Bettler, der Kaiser. The second, and below the vault is engraved in German characters the sentence Ab Arm, Ab Beach, I'm Toad Gleach. And this is something along the lines of well, here, let's we was Thor, who wise, who beggar or emperor, is what the first says. And the second says whether it's arm or itch be equal in death. Whether it's arm or I would substitute that with something else regarding the body, but be equal in death. The picture is accompanied by a card on which is written from the German chapter, presented by D.C. Gilman of D50. Daniel Coit Gilman, along with 2 other bonesmen, formed a troika which still influences American life today. Soon after their initiation in Skull and Bones, Daniel Gilman, Timothy Dwight, and Andrew Dickinson White went to study philosophy in Europe at the University of Berlin. Gilman returned from Europe and incorporated Skull and Bones as Russell Trust in 1856 with himself as treasurer and William H. Russell as president. He spent the next 14 years in New Haven consolidating the order's power. Gilman was appointed librarian at Yale in 1858. Through shrewd political maneuvering, he acquired funding for Yale's science department's Sheffield Scientific School, and was able to get the Morrill Land Bill introduced in Congress, passed, and finally signed by President Lincoln, after being vetoed by President Buchanan. This bill, donating public lands for State College for Agricultural and Sciences, is known as the Land Grant Act. Yale was the first school in America to get the federal land scrip and quickly grabbed all of Connecticut's share at that time. Pleased by the acquisitions, Yale made Gilman a professor of physical geography. Daniel was the first president of the University of California. He also helped found and was the first president of Johns Hopkins. Gilman was first president of the Carnegie Institution and involved in the founding of the Peabody, Slater, and Russell Sage Foundations. His buddy Andrew D. White was the first president of Cornell University, which received all of New York's shares of the Land Grant College Act. U.S. Minister to Russia, U.S. Ambassador to Berlin, and first president of the American Historical Association. White was also chairman of the American delegation to the First Hague Conference in 1899, which established an international judiciary. Timothy Dwight, a professor at Yale Divinity School, was installed as president of Yale in 1886. All presidents since have either been bonesmen or directly tied to the order and its interests. The Daniel Gilman White trio was also responsible for the founding of the American Economic Association, the American Chemical Society, and the American Psychological Association. Through their influences on John Dewey and Horace Mann, this trio continues to have an enormous impact on education today. In his book, America's Secret Establishment, Anthony Sutton outlined the order of Skull and Bones' ability to establish vertical and horizontal chains of influence that ensured their continuity of their conspiratorial schemes. The Whitney-Stimson-Bundy links represents the vertical chain. W.C. Whitney, who married Flora Payne of the Standard Oil Payne dynasty, was Secretary of the Navy. His attorney was a man named Elihu Root. Root hired Henry Stimson out of law school. Stimson took over from Root as a Secretary of War in 1911, appointed by fellow bonesman William Howard Taft. Stimson later became Coolidge's governor, general of the Philippine Islands, Hoover's Secretary of State, and Secretary of War during the Roosevelt and Truman administrations. Hollister Bundy was Stimson's special assistant and point man in the Pentagon for the Manhattan Project. His two sons, also members of Skull and Bones, were William Bundy and McGeorge Bundy, both very active in governmental and Foundation affairs. The two brothers, from their position in the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the State Department, and as special assistants to President Kennedy and Johnson, exercised significant impact on the flow of information and intelligence during the Vietnam War. William Bundy went on to be editor of Foreign Affairs, the influential quarterly of the Council on Foreign Affairs. McGeorge became president of the Ford Foundation. Another interesting group of bonesmen is the Harriman/Bush crowd. Averell Harriman, elder statesman of the Democratic Party, and his brother Roland Harriman were very active members. In fact, 4 of Roland's fellow bowmen from the class of 1917 were directors of Brown Brothers and Brown Brothers Harriman, including Prescott Bush, George Bush's dad. Since the turn of the century, 2 investment bank firms, Guaranteed Trust and Brown Brothers Harriman, were both dominated by members of Skull and Bones. These 2 firms were heavily involved in financing of communism and Hitler's regime. Now, this is what this next report that I'm releasing is all about. I might just include it with this and then do another separately at the end, because this is the most important information that is out there right now. This all together you will see. Bonesmen share an affinity for the Hegelian ideas of the historical dialectic, which dictates the use of controlled conflict, thesis versus antithesis, to create a predetermined synthesis, a synthesis of their making and design where the state is absolute and individuals are granted their freedoms based on their obedience to the state, a new world order. Funding and political maneuvering on the part of bonesmen and their allies helped the Bolsheviks prevail in Russia. In defiance of federal laws, the cabal financed industries, established banks, and developed oil and mineral deposits in the fledgling USSR. Later, Averell Harriman, as minister to Great Britain in charge of Lend-Lease for Britain and Russia, was responsible for shipping entire factories into Russia. According to some researchers, Harriman also oversaw the transfer of nuclear secrets, plutonium, and U.S. dollar printing plates to the USSR. In 1932, the Union Banking Corporation of New York City has enlisted 4 directors from the cell and 2 Nazi bankers associated with Fritz Thyssen, who had been financing Hitler since 1924. From George Bush Unauthorized Biograph. President Franklin Roosevelt's alien property custodian, Leo T. Crowley, signed Vesting Order Number 248, 11/17/42, seizing the property of Prescott Bush under the Trading with the Enemy Act. The order, published in obscure government record books and kept out of the news, note number 4, explained nothing about the Nazis involved, only that the Union Banking Corporation was run for the Thyssen family of Germany and or Hungary, nationals of a designated enemy country. By deciding that Prescott Bush and the other directors of the Union Banking Corporation were legally frontmen for the Nazis, the government avoided the more important historical issue: in what way were Hitler's Nazis themselves hired, armed, and instructed by the New York and London clique of which Prescott Bush was an executive manager? New York Times, December 16, 1944, ran a 5-paragraph page, 25 article on actions of the New York State Banking Department. Only the last sentence refers to the Nazi bank as follows: The Union Banking Corporation, 39 Broadway, New York, has received authority to change its principal place of business to 120 Broadway. The Times omitted the fact that the Union Banking Corporation had been seized by the government for trading with the enemy, and the fact that 120 Broadway was the address of the government's alien property custodian. After the war, Prescott went on to become a U.S. Senator from Connecticut and favorite golfing partner of President Eisenhower. Prescott claims responsibility for getting Nixon into politics and takes personal credit for bringing Dick on board as Ike's running mate in 1952. Name roster of the secret establishment. There were so many Yaleys in the OSS that Yale's drinking tune, the Whiffin' Poof song, became an unofficial song of the OSS. Many in the OSS were bonesmen or belonged to other Yale senior societies. Robert Lovett, Harriman's childhood friend, had been tapped into Skull and Bones by Prescott Bush's cell of 17 and was a director at Brown Brothers and Harriman. Again from the George Bush unauthorized biography. On October 22, 1945, Secretary of War Robert Patterson created the Lovett Committee, chaired by Robert A. Lovett, to advise the government on the post-World War II organization of U.S. intelligence activities. The new agency would consult with the armed forces, but it must be the sole collecting agency in the field of foreign espionage and counterespionage. The new agency should have an independent budget, and its appropriation should be granted by Congress without public hearings. Lovett appeared before the Secretaries of State, War, and Navy on November 14, 1945, and if you remember earlier that the Secretary of the Navy was one of his buddies, Lovett pressed for a virtual resumption of the Wartime Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The CIA was established in 1947 according to the prescription of Robert Lovett of Jupiter Island. Gaddis Smith, a history professor at Yale, said Yale has influenced the Central Intelligence Agency more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion, and Bonesmans have been foremost among the spooks building the CIA's haunted house. Truby Davison was director of personnel at the CIA in the early years. Some of the other Bonesmen connected with the intelligence community are, you can read this list of names: Senator John Kerry, and of course, George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush tapped Coffin, who tapped Buckley. Some other prominent Bonesmen include Ever since Nixon re-established America's political relationship with China, many of our ambassadors to that country have been Bonesmen, including George Bush, the first chief U.S. liaison officer to the People's Republic of China. China and the Opium Wars. Why all this interest in China? Well, China, among other things, is one of the largest producers and users of opiates in the world. For a while, in the 1800s, the Yankee Clippers of Connecticut and Massachusetts were the fastest ships on the ocean. Speed was crucial to the opium trade. Whoever made it the trip from Turkey to India to Macau or Hong Kong / Shanghai first got the most for their goods. So they got the most for their dope if they got there quicker, obviously. During the Opium Wars, the U.S. chose to stand on the sidelines and cheer for the English and French, knowing that treaty obligations would bring the U.S. a share in the spoils. Russell and Company was at that time the only trading house operating in Canton and used the opportunity to develop strong commercial ties and handsome profits. Powerful national interests were behind the drug trade because American traders were badly in need of some article the Chinese would buy. Since by this time the seal breeding grounds had been nearly wiped out, if the Chinese had not bought opium from the Americans, the United States imports of silk, porcelain, and tea would have to be paid in precious coin, which was in short supply in 1843. When the port of Shanghai was opened, Russell & Co. was one of its earliest traders. That's Yale. In 1903, Yale Divinity School set up a program of schools and hospitals in China. Mao Zedong was among the staff. During the intrigues of China in the 1930s and 40s, American intelligence called upon the resources of Yale in China, and George Bush's cousin and fellow Bonesman Reuben Holden. After stints as UN ambassador and chairman of the Republican National Committee for the beleaguered Richard Nixon, George Bush was sent to look after the China trade. The Bush family is still very much involved in the economic activities of Red China. Many researchers contend that George Bush has been with the CIA since the early 1950s and that one of his jobs was to consolidate and coordinate the worldwide narcotics industry, the largest industry on Earth. Some say that one of the reasons behind the Vietnam police action was a cover for the consolidation of the Golden Triangle. The war on drugs and intellectual fraud. Before the Vietnam War, the Golden Triangle was run by French intelligence and Corsican mobsters. After the French bailed out and America moved in, the triangle was run by U.S. intelligence with aid from Sicilian mobsters. This narcotics network is well documented in The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia by Alfred McCoy and The Great Heroin Coup by Henry Kruger and Double Cross by Sam and Chuck Giancana. Vice President George Bush, as chairman of President Reagan's cabinet-level working group and as director of the National Narcotics Interdiction System, was the highest U.S. government official involved in the war on drugs. This is such a joke. Francis Mullen, Jr., former head of the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, called Bush's efforts an intellectual fraud and a liability rather than an asset. Soon after these statements, Mullen resigned, and the resultant General Accounting Office (GAO) report was buried. In July 1985, the suppressed GAO paper reported that there were no benefits from the National Narcotics Border Interdiction System directed by George Bush. In fact, the overall effect was to encourage supply. So they're saying that Bush was in charge of overseeing the drug trade, and he was in charge of the war on drugs. President Reagan appointed Reform Party founder and Texas billionaire Ross Perot to the President's Advisory Council on Foreign Intelligence. Reagan made Perot a special presidential investigator, looking into America's POWs and MIAs from the Vietnam War. Ross took the job to heart and spent considerable time and money in pursuit of the quest. He was given special clearance and access. He asked questions and interviewed everyone he could find. From Kiss the Boys Goodbye. Relations between Bush and Perot had gone downhill ever since the vice president had asked Ross Perot how his Palmilla investigations were going. "Well, George, I go in looking for prisoners," said Perot, "but I spend all my time discovering the government has been moving drugs around the world and is involved in illegal arms deals. I can't get at the prisoners because of the corruption among our own people." This ended Perot's official access to the highly classified files as a one-man presidential investigator. "I have been instructed to cease and desist," he had informed the families of missing men early in 1987. The wholesale importation of cocaine into the U.S. during Iran-Contra is also well documented. George Bush is known to be in the loop, with many of the players keeping in contact directly with his office. Also, there has been much speculation as to the use of the offshore rigs, pipelines, and other assets of Zapata Offshore being used for narcotic transshipments. Narcotics such as cocaine and heroin cannot be manufactured without the precursor chemicals. One of the largest makers of these precursor chemicals is the Eli Lilly Company of Indianapolis, Indiana. The Quayle family is a large stockholder, and George Bush has been on the board of directors. Eli Lilly is also the company that first synthesized LSD for the CIA. George Bush, Skull and Bones, and the JFK assassination. Rodney Stitch's book, Defrauding America, tells of a deep-cover CIA officer assigned to a counterintelligence unit codenamed Pegasus. This unit had tape recordings of plans to assassinate Kennedy from a tap on the phone of J. Edgar Hoover. The people on the tapes were Nelson, Rockefeller, Allen Dulles, Lyndon Johnson of Texas, George Bush, and J. Edgar Hoover. Could George Bush be involved in the JFK assassinations? In 1963, Bush was living in Houston, busily carrying out his duties as president of the Zapata Offshore Oil Company. He denied the existence of a note sent by the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover to Mr. George Bush of the CIA, when news of the note surfaced. The CIA first said they never commented on employment questions, but later relented, said yes, a George Bush was mentioned in the note, but that it was another George Bush, not the man who took office in the White House in 1988. Some intrepid reporters tracked down the other George Bush and discovered that he was just a lowly clerk who had shuffled papers for the CIA for about 6 months. He never received any interagency messages from anybody at the FBI, let alone the Queen Mary. It was also worth noting that a CIA code word for Bay of Pigs was Operation Zapata, and that 2 of the support vessels were named Barbara and Houston. Barbara Bush. Many say that George Bush was high up on the CIA ladder at that time, running proprietary vehicles and placed in a position of command responsible for many of the Cubans recruited into service at that time. All through the Iran-Contra affair, Felix Rodriguez, the man who captured and had Che Guevara killed for the CIA, always seemed to call Bush's office first. From The Realist, summer 1991. Bush was working with the now famous CIA agent Felix Rodriguez, recruiting right-wing Cuban exiles for the invasion of Cuba. It was Bush's CIA job to organize the Cuban community in Miami for the invasion. A newly discovered FBI document reveals that George Bush was directly involved in the 1963 murder of President John Kennedy. The document places marksman by the CIA. Bush at that time lived in Texas, hopping from Houston to Miami weekly. Bush spent 1960 and 61 recruiting Cubans in Miami for the invasion. George Bush claimed he never worked for the CIA until he was appointed director by former Warren Commission director and then President Jerry Ford in 1976. Logic suggests that is highly unlikely. Of course, Bush has a company duty to deny being in the CIA. The CIA is a secret organization. No one ever admits to being a member. The truth is that Bush has been a top CIA official since before the 1961 invasion of Cuba, working with Felix Rodriguez. Bush may deny his actual role in the CIA in 1959, but there are records in the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba that expose Bush's role. On the Watergate tapes, June 23, 1972, referred to in the media as the smoking gun conversation, Nixon and his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, were discussing how to stop the FBI investigation into the CIA Watergate burglary. They were worried that the investigation would expose their connection to the Bay of Pigs thing. Haldeman, in his book, The Ends of Power, reveals that Nixon always used code words when talking about the 1963 murder of JFK. Haldeman said Nixon would always refer to the assassination as the Bay of Pigs. On that transcript, we find Nixon discussing the role of George Bush's partner, Robert Moschbacher, as one of the Texas fundraisers for Nixon. On the tapes, Nixon keeps referring to the Cubans and the Texans. The Texans were Bush, Moschbacher, and Baker. This is another direct link between Bush and the evidence linking Nixon and Bush to the Kennedy assassination. Motives for the conspiracy. So why would an intelligence agency, secret society, want to smuggle drugs and assassinate JFK? Well, they make a lot of money, and they garner intelligence assets through their participation. There's also the rationale that the word is a seamy and unseemly place, and if you're going to be a big boy on the block, you better know what's going on, and what better way of knowing than by running it yourself? There are also some who theorize that the covert drug trade fits with plans to destabilize American families and society through demoralizing and fracturing the body, politic they can impose their will using psychological warfare and the political alchemy of the Hegelian dialectic. James Shelby Downer's article, Sorcery, Sex, Assassination, and the Science of Symbolism, as you who watch know the importance of symbolism that I talk about, an underground classic links American historical events with a wild numerological grand occult plan to turn us into cybernetic mystery zombies. The assassination of JFK, this article contends, was the performance of a public occult ritual called the Killing of the King, designed as a mass trauma mind control assault against our U.S. national body politic. During Operation Sunrise, Operation Blowback, Operation Paperclip, and others, thousands of Nazi scientists, researchers, and administrators were brought to the United States after World War II. Many were smuggled into the country against direct written orders from President Harry S. Truman. Project Monarch was the resumption of a mind control project called marionette programming, which started in Nazi Germany. The basic component of the Monarch program is the sophisticated manipulation of the mind using extreme trauma to induce multiple personality disorder. Mr. Downward feels that the perpetrators purposefully murdered JFK in such a way as to affect our national identity and cohesiveness, to fracture America's soul. Even the blatancy of their conspiracy was designed to show their superiority and our futility. There have been studies that show the correlation between the JFK assassination and the rise in violence in society, distrust of government, and other extensions of social ills. The Illuminati subverting the body of politic. Why this attack against their body politic? In 1785, a bolt of lightning struck a courier en route to Paris from Frankfurt on the Main. A tract written by Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, original shift in Days of the Illuminations, was recovered from the dead messenger, containing the secret society's long-range plan for the New World Order through the World Revolution. Talk about an act from God, struck by lightning and killed, with the most important message that released everything. The Bavarian government outlawed the society and in 1787 published the details of the Illuminati conspiracy in the original writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. In Adam Weishaupt's own words, "By this plan we shall direct all mankind in this manner, and by the simplest means we shall set all in motion and in flames. The occupation must be so allotted and contrived that we may in secret influence all political transactions." This is so important. Listen, all political transactions. This stems from the Germans. This all comes down to the Germans and the Jews, but I'll get into that in a minute. There is a disagreement among scholars as to whether or not the Illuminati survived its banishment. Nevertheless, the group had been quite successful in attracting members and had allied itself with the extensive Masonic networks. The Illuminati was publicly founded May 1st, 1776, is that a coincidence? At the University of Ingolstadt by Weishaupt, professor of canon law. It was a very canon law, Jewish. It was a very learned society. Weishaupt drew the earliest members of his order from among his students. On December 5th, 1776, students at William and Mary College founded a secret society, Phi Beta Kappa. A second chapter was formed at Yale in 1780. And the anti-Masonic movement in the United States during the 1820s held groups such as Phi Beta Kappa in bad light. Because of pressure, the society went public. This is noted by some researchers as the direct cause of the appearance of Yale's Order of the Skull and Bones. In the Cyclopedia of Fraternities, a genealogical chart of the general Greek letter college fraternities in the United States show Phi Beta Kappa as the parent of all fraternal systems in American higher education. There is only one side, lineal descendant, the Yale chapter of 1780. The line then continues to Skull and Bones in 1832, and on through the other, only at Yale senior societies Scroll and Key and Wolf's Head. Phi Beta Kappa is the first three Greek letters for Philosophia Bu Cabernatis, or love of wisdom, the helmsman of life. A skull homophone is a skull, a quick gliding boat, and part of a Skull and Bones first nomenclature. John Robison, a professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh University in Scotland and a member of a Freemason lodge, said that he was asked to join the Illuminati. After study, he concluded the purpose of the Illuminati were not for him. In 1798, he published a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. An association has been formed for the express purpose of rooting out all of the religious establishments and overturning all the existing governments. The leaders would rule the world with uncontrollable power, while all the rest would be employed as tools of the ambition of their unknown superiors. Proofs of a conspiracy was sent to George Washington. Responding to the sender of the book with a letter, the president said he was well aware of the Illuminati were in America. He felt that the Illuminati had diabolical tenets and that their object was a separation of the people from their government. And proofs of conspiracy, that's just too important to skip over. And that their object was a separation of the people from their government. This is our government, people. This is our government. They work for us. The CIA, the FBI, all these fucking idiots, they work for us. They're not there to be putting us in jail and to be fucking smuggling drugs and corrupting our kids and killing our presidents and infesting our government and trying to overturn it for the devil, because it all comes down to these Luciferians. That's what they are. They're Luciferians. Okay, it's just that's what it is. This is the information that comes from the Knights Templar, and it comes all the way back from, you know, before Jesus and the mystery schools of the occult and all that. But we'll get into that later. So anyway, George Washington, the founder of the United States, or the first president, whatever you want to say, said that their object was a separation of the people from their government. When the government was written and when the Constitution was written, it was written in order to protect us from exactly what's happening right now, the government being taken control of by the Germans. In proofs of a conspiracy, Robinson printed the ceremony of initiation of the Regent degree in Illuminism. In it, a skeleton is pointed out to him, the initiate, at the feet of which are laid a crown and sword. He is asked whether that is the skeleton of a king, nobleman, or a beggar. As he cannot decide, the president of the meeting says to him, the character of a being, a man, is the only one that is of importance. This is essentially the same as the writing in the Skull and Bones tomb. War der Thur, Weiser, Bettler, Oder, Kaiser, Ob Arm, Ob Reich, Am Todi Gleich, which reads, who was the fool, who the wise man, beggar or king, whether poor or rich, all's the same in death. So, this translator is not right. Skull and Bones Illuminati. It's the Order of the Skull and Bones part of the Illuminati. See, I made it this far, and it took me a half hour to get into this far, and I figured I better start recording it because I knew I had to do it again, so I made it to about here, and I started recording and had to reread. So anyway, when a person is initiated into Skull and Bones, they are given a new name similar to the practice of the Illuminati, and many recorded Illuminati members can be shown to have contact and or strong influences with many of the professors that taught Bonesmen in Berlin. What a secret society conspires against, the sovereignty of a king, they need to organize, raise funds, make their plans operational, and hopefully bring them to fruition. Could we have in the United States a secret society that has used the national security state as a cover for their nefarious plans? From George Bush, the biography again. That September 1951, Robert Lovett replaced Marshall as Secretary of Defense. Meanwhile, Harriman was named Director of the Mutual Security Agency, making him the U.S. Chief of the Anglo-American Military Alliance. By now, Brown Brothers, Harriman was everything but Commander-in-Chief. Brown Brothers and Harriman were the ones that financed Hitler and the Third Reich. Direct dealtly with Heinrich Himmler. A central focus of the Harriman security regime in Washington, 1950-53, was the organization of covert operations and psychological warfare. Harriman, together with his lawyers and business partners, Allen and John Foster Dulles, wanted the government's secret services to conduct extensive propaganda campaigns and mass psychology experiments within the USA and paramilitary campaigns abroad. The Harriman security regime created the Psychological Strategy Board, PSB, in 1951. The man appointed director of the PSB was Gordon Gray. Gordon brothers R.J. Reynolds, go figure, Chairman Bowman Gray Jr. was also a naval intelligence officer known around Washington as the founder of Operational Intelligence. Gordon Gray became a close friend of the political ally of Prescott Bush, and Gray's son became for Prescott's son, George, his lawyer and the shield of his covert policy. So you have the Whitney/Stimson-Bundy clan and the Harriman/Bush boys wielding a tremendous amount of influence on the political, economic, and social affairs of America and the world. Then you have Prescott Bush's buddy Richard Nixon as an activist vice president. Then a nation-chilling assassination sometime under LBJ with the Bundy boys keeping things in line. Then Nixon as president with Bonesman aides Ray Price and Richard A. Moore sometimes out for a trilateralist Democratic patsy president, followed by Prescott's son as an activist vice president under Reagan. Next, we get a skull and bones president who declares a new world order while beating up on his business partner Saddam Hussein. After 12 years of Republican administrations, Bush passes the reins to his drug smuggling buddy from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, who studied at Yale Law School. According to some researchers, Clinton was recruited as a CIA operative while a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. Could this be an old Hegelian historical dialectic process? World history, plan or accident. Will we get another failed Democratic administration, a scandal as disgraceful as Nixon's fall when Robert P. Johnson and William Barr told Clinton in a bunker in Arkansas that you are our fair-haired boy, but you do not have competition for the job you seek? But you do have competition for the job you seek? We would never put all our eggs in one basket. You and your state have been our greatest asset. Mr. Casey wanted me to pass on to you that unless you fuck up and do something stupid, you are number one on our short list for shot at the job you always wanted. So you have William Casey, CIA director, George Bush's campaign manager and sovereign knight of Malta, speaking through the proxy of George Bush's last attorney general to George's rival in the 1992 federal elections. Is it all just a show and sham for the U.S. hoi polloi? Perhaps so, if there exists the type of control over the electoral process as told by Mae Brussel in the suppressed book Vote Scam, written by Jim and Ken Collier. Your vote and mine may not be a meaningless bit of energy directed by pre-programmed computers. Your vote and mine may now be a meaningless bit of energy directed by pre-programmed computers which can be fixed to select certain preordained candidates and leave no footprint or paper trail. In short, computers are covertly stealing your vote. For almost 3 decades, the American vote has been subject to government-sponsored electronic theft. The vote has been stolen from you by a cartel of federal national security bureaucrats who include higher-ups in the Central Intelligence Agency, political party leaders, congressmen, co-opted journalists, and the owners and managers of the major establishment news media who have decided in concert that how America's votes are counted, by whom they are counted, and now the results are verified and delivered to the public is, as one of them put it, not a proper area of inquiry. By means of an unofficial private corporation named News Election Service, NES, the establishment press has actual physical control of the counting and dissemination of the vote, and it refuses to let the public know how it's done. Is the American electoral subjected to cyclic propaganda, pre-selected candidates and winners, and psychological warfare to alienate Americans from institutions established to serve them by the Constitution? Are the Democratic and Republican national press parties used for a Hegelian experiment in controlled conflict? That's exactly what they are. Both the Democratic and the Republican parties were set up by people coming from Yale and Skull and Bones, and that's in another report. Left or right, it's the same thing. It's exactly what this is. It's a Hegelian experiment and controlled conflict. That's what it is. That's why the left and the right are fighting so much right now, because this has all been pushed on you by who other than George Soros, another Carlyle fucking. He's like one of the heads of the Carlyle group. We'll get into that. Pamela Churchill Harriman, Avril's wife, is one of the Democratic Party's biggest fundraisers. She once gave Bill a job as director of her PAM PAC when he was defeated for governor in 1980. Bill paid her back by appointing her as ambassador to France. Another Harriman Bush friend, Eugene Stetson, was an assistant manager for Prescott Bush at Brown Brothers Harriman's New York office, and he organized the H. Smith Richardson Foundation. The foundation in the late 50s participated in the MK-Ultra, the CIA's domestic covert psychological warfare operation. The Richardson Foundation helped to finance the testing of psychotropic drugs, including LSD, at Bridgewater Hospital in Massachusetts, the center of some of the most brutal MK-Ultra experiments. During the Iran-Contra operations, the H. Smith Richardson Foundation was a private donors steering committee, working with the National Security Council to coordinate the Office of Public Diplomacy. This was an effort to propagandize in favor of and run cover for the Iran-Contra operations and to coordinate published attacks on opponents of the program. The H. Smith Richardson Foundation also runs the Center for Creative Leadership at Langley to train leaders of the CIA, as well as other centers near Greensboro, North Carolina, that trains CIA and Secret Service agents. Almost everyone who achieves the military rank of general also gets this training. This is just the tip of an iceberg. You also have eugenics and population control, suppressed history and technology, yearly retreats, profitable partnerships with brutal dictators, deals with terrorists, the involvement of the Knights of Malta, warmongering and profiteering, mind control, secret societies for teens, ritual magic, and more, all spinning the dark threads in the web of conspiracy that our spinning blue ball has gotten caught in. We've got a whole new crop of bonesmen coming up, including George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush, governor of Texas. When Don Schollander, the Olympic gold medalist and only known Skull and Bones member living in Portland, was contacted by Willamette Week reporter John Schrang regarding his involvement in Order, he said, "It's really something I can't talk about. Not wouldn't, but couldn't." In wake of Anthony Sutton's first groundbreaking exposes the Order, the Sterling Library at Yale has refused to allow any other researchers access to the Russell Trust papers. Daniel Gilman, like most Bonesmen, makes no mention of Skull and Bones or that Russell Trust in his memoirs or biographies. So we all just fodder for a secret society with satanic overtones that is attempting to form a one-world government with themselves at the helm? Or is this the Order of Skull and Bones just a bunch of frat boys from Yale? Bet your future on it. And then here's the sources for everything. This is conspiracyarchive.com/nwo/skull_bones.htm. There will be a link below. So, this is quite a bit of information. To better understand Hitler, you need to better understand his influence by secret societies. The occult aspect of the rise of Hitler is a very important part of the whole scenario, and regardless what other researchers might say, I as well claim the power of Hitler were the same old secret societies that have influenced this planet negatively throughout the eons. Some might say it was psychiatrists, others might say it was something else, and they all may be right, but the point is that it all narrows down to the ancient Illuminati and the mystery schools. The occult aspect of the Third Reich is something that has been quite suppressed in the media and history books. This is the symbol from Madame Blavatsky, basically the founder Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, 1831 to 91, is without comparison the single person who has had the most influence in the occult sciences in the 19th century. She was born in Ukraine with the name of von Hahn Rottenstem, which she was a very sensitive child, often sleepwalking, and suffered from hallucinations. Tibet was a very popular place to travel to in the 19th century when most Europeans were quite disillusioned. So did also Madame Blavatsky, who as an adult saw herself as a telepath and psychic. She was also the author to the book Secret Doctrine. In this book she wrote during her trip to Tibet, she was led into a secret room underneath a Tibetan monastery where she was shown texts of an ancient occult and mystical secrets of the universe, which also was said to lay route to the future course of history. The text said that once man was pure in spirit, without a body, but had fallen down to base matter, darkness, and chaos. She then was initiated into magical practicing using esoteric symbols which learnt how the human race once again would rise into pure spirit. She claimed she was in current telepathic contact with hidden masters who taught her the occult history of the human race. Blavatsky was taught that the most powerful symbol of these esoteric ones was the swastika. She wrote there were 7 stages of evolution. She named them root races. The race which should rise again to true spirit she named Aryans. In Tibet, the swastika was known as Son of Fire and Creation, but in Madame Blavatsky's teachings, the swastika was the symbol of the Aryan race. Guido von List. Guido von List, 1848 to 1919, was an eccentric person who played a significant part for the members of the Germanic order. He claimed to have understood the secrets of runes during an eye operation. It was from him Hitler got fascinated by the magic of the runes. Von List also had visions that told him of an old Germanic religion, the worship of the god Wotan. From that point, he wanted to rediscover the secrets of the vanishing occult heritage of the priesthood. He knew that the runes were an early form of writing, but he was convinced they had deeper esoteric meaning. He claimed the runes were key to secret knowledge of ancient Germanic peoples. Von List died in 1919, but his teachings survived through the National Socialists and came to play an important part in its insignia, and it was mandatory for SS officers to learn the occult meanings of the runic symbols. Von List taught that the swastika was the very act of creation, based on the Norse legend about the creation of the universe. By 1909, Von List became quite famous. He even got his own society dedicated to his occult teachings called the List Society. He was very fascinated by Madame Blavatsky's ideas too, so he incorporated her occult teachings into his own teachings of German myth. The Germanic tribes were now called the Aryans. In his vision of new Germanic state, there would be a strict hierarchy. People would obey without asking questions. Only the males of the families would achieve full rights. If you were an Aryan heritage, you would get full citizenship, but you had to prove that you were a real Aryan first. And of course your duty was to keep your Aryan race clean, meaning you shouldn't crossbreed with lower beings. One might say that Guido von List, born Austrian, was the forefather to Nazi eugenics. But there was another man who picked up the idea and got obsessed by it. His name was George Lanz von Liebenfels. Von Liebenfels combined von List's teachings with his own interest in eugenics and created a new doctrine which he called theozoology. He claimed that the Atlantean 4th root race, taken from Madame Blavatsky's 7 root races, had after thousands of years interbred with beasts. So this race had now separated into 2 separate races, one pure Aryan and one into a species of beasts. Because of the unfortunate interbreeding, the Atlantean Aryan's psychic power had rendered to almost nothing. To understand this further, I'm going to give a brief explanation of the 5 root races. 1. The first race to evolve on Earth was the astral race, a race of pure spirit, the purest form of existence. 2. The second race was known as the Hyperborean race. They used to live on a now vanished continent in the Northern Ocean. 3. The third race was called the Lemurians, who fell because of interbreeding with animals. 4. The fourth race was known as the Atlanteans, who possessed psychic powers and lived in gigantic cities. They were destroyed by a great flood. The 5th race was known as the race of Hope, the founder of the ancient Greece culture, and they soon would rise to the pinnacle of spirituality to form of the Aryan. The 6th and 7th root races will come to existence in the future when our present 5th root race will experience a racial cataclysm which will cut it into 2 halves. The same occurrence also happened in the fourth and third root races, the Lemurians. The sixth and seventh root races also experienced a racial cataclysm. Von Liebenfels believed the Atlanteans had had a strict breeding control in form of laws to retain their psychic abilities, and he wanted to recreate the Aryan race from the Atlantis era by purifying the blood of the Germans by using new strict race laws. He said that Christianity had destroyed the old teachings of the Aryans and that these teachings had to be practiced again. He believed that after many generations of strict breeding, it would bring about a superior race of gods to rule the earth. He meant that the true Aryans were the Germans. On the contrary, there were the Jews, whom he claimed to be the ones most against the revival of the Aryans. He believed the Jews were an alien enemy race. In 1905, he started publishing a magazine called Ostara, named after the Teutonic god of beauty. This magazine was filled with occult teachings and beliefs. According to Liebenfels, only one own words, he sold quite a few magazines, and his teachings quickly started to give response. One man who absorbed these teachings deeply was Adolf Hitler. He was so inspired by Ostara that he quoted passages upon passage of it in his future book, Mein Kampf. Von Liebenfels' dream was a purified race ran like a straight line through the magazine. He wrote about it had to be dedicated eugenics convents with brood mothers for the Aryan males. He even recommended polygamy for this purpose. It was also von Liebenfels who came up with the idea that those who are handicapped or mentally ill had to be sterilized. Those who were of a different race should be deported to Madagascar or killed. He justified it and said the only purpose with this was to prevent inferior races from the east to come to the west. He also taught that the Holy Grail was the symbol for psychic powers of pure-blooded Aryans, and the search for the Grail would be the search for purity. He suggested that marriage between an Aryan and a non-Aryan should be punished by starvation. Democracy and capitalism were vicious inventions by lower races like the Jews, and he was sure the Jews were only there to see that the Aryan race wouldn't rise again in purity. In 1907, he formed a secret society devoted to his teachings. The order was called the Order of the New Templars, with its seat in Austria. The purpose with this society was to salvage the Aryan race. His vision of the world was a vision of harmony, pure art, science, occult religion, and to see that the Aryans spread all over the world. After World War I, the German people were generally ashamed and embarrassed over their defeat, and most of them had thought that the Versailles Treaty, done over people's heads by the Freemasons, would bring Germany downwards towards anarchy and apathy. Thus, in 1919, the Revolutionary Socialist Republic were declared by workers and soldiers. Nationalists and monarchists were preparing a counter-revolution, but behind the facade, in secret, there was a conspiracy run by the ultranational organization called the Thule Society. This was a Munich lodge created in 1918 by, among others, especially one man called Rudolf Glauer. He changed his name, though, to a very prominent one, Baron Heinrich von Schwettendorf. This was an anti-Semitic order, and the followers followed the occult teachings of von List. On the 9th of November 1919, a lot of nines there, the Thule Society gave a briefing where he said, "Thule will fight until the swastika rises out victoriously from the icy darkness." During the next few months, Thule stocked weapons together with other nationalist groups and trained men especially for the counter-revolution. On the 30th of April 1919, the revolution was declared. Munich was stormed by the ultranationalists, and on many helmets there was the symbol of a swastika. The revolution became a success, and with the success plans were laid out for Germany of the 1920s, where supporters in high power were led into the mystic esoteric teachings of the occult world of von List. New lodges were formed, and one of them was the Berlin Lodge. All those lodges were anti-Semitic and had members among judges, lawyers, doctors, aristocrats, industrialists, and powerful businessmen. To join, you had to be of pure Aryan inheritance, have blonde hair, eyes blue or brown, their skin had to be fair. In the Berlin Lodge, even the skull shape of the members were considered. Most of the joined members didn't know that the Thule Society was behind those formations. One day, a locksmith called Anton Drexler started organizing the Workers' Party into a new political group. Thule agreed to this. On the 5th of January 1919, the Workers' Party's new structure was declared. It was now called the German Workers' Party. About 10 months after that, an army spy was sent to check on this new political group, and his name was Adolf Hitler. Very quickly, Hitler became an active member of the group, and in 4 months the party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. On the 20th of May 1920, the swastika was adopted by the NSPA, and Hitler chose to perform it anti-clockwise as a contrary meaning to its origin. The swastika, which for so long had to be the symbol of light, now became the symbol of darkness. In esoteric teachings, one can reverse a symbol and thus get another meaning out of it. Von Liszt's original curved Thule swastika pictured above would not disappear and be forgotten, but would be used on the belt buckles of the brown shirts. The Thule Society was an offspring from the Germanic order founded in 1912, which also was led by von Schottendorf. He had published a strange booklet called Die Praxis der alten Türkischen Freimaurer, the practice of ancient Turkish Freemasonry. It was about how alchemy could transform mankind. Many Nazis, from Hitler to Rudolf Hess, frequented this society. Hitler himself was introduced to the idea of Thule during the mutual imprisonment after the failed Munich Putsch. The Thule Society already bore the swastika and was marked as anti-Semitic and that of Germanic racial thinking. There's an excellent book written on the subject of the Thule Society and Nazi connection. It's written by Trevor Ravenscroft, and it is called The Spear of Destiny. Ravenscroft says that the inner core of the Thule Society were Satanists and practiced black magic. The sole intent was for them, with help from magic rituals, bring consciousness up to a level where they could perceive the evil of the world and stay in telepathic communication with alien life forms who communicate on that level. Briefly, Thule had an inner creed. Thule was a legendary island far up in the north, similar to Atlantis, the center of the lost high-level civilization. But still, some of the secret knowledge from that time exists, they say. The remaining knowledge should be guarded and protected by ancient, highly intelligent beings. Compare the Masters of Theosophy or the White Brotherhood. The truly initiate could, by magical rituals, keep in contact with those beings. The Masters, in their turn, could endow the initiated with supernatural strength and energy. With the help of this energy, the goal of the initiate would be to create a race of supermen of Aryan stock who would exterminate all lower races. The cosmology of this secret society pointed back to an early epoch about 15 million years ago when a huge moon moved across the sky very near to Earth. Because of the gravitation which followed, a new race was born, which in fact were our ancestors, the giants. Those giants also appeared in the Norse and Icelandic myths. Asleep, but still alive, to the Nazis they were supermen. Also, there was a cosmic force called Vril, the bizarre geology known as the Hollow Earth Theory, and the cosmology of Hans Horbiger's Weltschleier, or the doctrine of eternal ice. The Vril Society. Another important occultist in Hitler's life was Dietrich Eckart, an alcoholic and drug addict who believed he was on a mission to make the way for a German dictator. He met Hitler in 1919 and decided that Hitler was the Messiah he had been waiting for. Eckart was probably the person who was in charge of over Hitler's more advanced esoteric knowledge and the black magic rituals. Thanks to Eckart, Hitler's ability to magnetize the masses increased. In 1923, Eckart wrote to a friend, "Follow Hitler. He will dance, but I am the one to blow the pipe. We have given him the means to put himself in communication with them. Mourn me not. I have influenced history more than any other German." J.H. Brennan, Occult Reich. Hitler now became a member of even another occult organization, the Vril Society. Vril was the language spoken by the Atlanteans, composed of sounds and clicks. According to the English writer Lord Bulwer Lytton, who named the society, Vril was the power that woke up a man's ability to be a superhuman. In 1933, the rocket expert Willy Ley fled Germany and revealed the existence of the Vril Society, as well as the Nazis' beliefs that they, through esoteric teachings and expansion of their consciousness, would be equals to the super race inside the Hollow Earth. By their methods, they could then wake up the Vril power which was slumbering in the blood. The Vril Society counted two special persons who later would become infamous Nazis, Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler. The Vrils thought they were in connection with secret exoteric lodges in Tibet and so-called unknown superhumans. The occultists during the Second World War was with no doubt Heinrich Himmler. He was the Grand Master of several secret societies and had satanic and black magic masses organized in several different old castles along Germany. Himmler was for sure responsible for much of the terror which was created in the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler, the Black Magician. Heinrich Himmler, the German Reichsfuhrer and the head of the SS, had a clear intention to create a secret order where Prussia ethics were combined with those of the old knighthood orders like the Teutonic Order. There are journal films showing German Nazi soldiers dressed like old knights in armor with swords and spears and riding horses doing parades on the streets of Berlin. Some say he could not obtain it since the orders of Catholicism were openly opposed by the radical wing of National Socialism. But the parades I mentioned above tell us otherwise. He also wanted to create his own secret society without any influence from the traditional ones, who were already top controlled. He was into the Nordic heritage and its symbolism like the Thule Society, but didn't want any influence from that society either. In other words, he wanted to construct a society that was entirely his own creation with himself as Grand Master with ultimate power. He did achieve that dream. Heinrich Himmler had been in contact with all esoteric knowledge, and he used it as dark as possible. He was especially interested in rune magic. It was Himmler who created the famous SS, and like the swastika, he used another magic symbol, the two Sig runes, which look like two flashes. Within the SS, all the esoteric knowledge in the Third Reich finally was gathered. SS was ruled by black magic, secret order. Their rituals were borrowed from other similar orders, like the Jesuit order and the Templar order. The highest-ranking priests of this order were the 13 members of the Knights' Great Council, which was ruled by Grand Master Heinrich Himmler. The black rituals were practiced in the old castle Wulsburg in Westphalen. Here they obeyed Lucifer, Satan, or Set, the consciousness which then inspired the Nazis and today the Illuminati. Himmler had lots of strange beliefs, and one of his main inspirations came from the 10th century king named Heinrich I, the German king of the Saxons. King Heinrich had fought and conquered the Slavic tribes in the east. Himmler believed with all his heart that the racial theories and manifestations of Nazism. He was a fanatic sadist who suffered from constant psychosomatic illness like stomach pains, headaches, and other unidentified aches and diseases. He also arranged big parades in the streets with soldiers dressed like old knights as a symbol for ancient power. His undying passion for control over others was enormous, and his favorite words were Nadelos, merciless. Himmler was so fanatically struck by the old King Heinrich that he even thought he was a reincarnation of this person and received psychic messages from him, which seems quite strange if they were the same person. However, Himmler believed his mission was to be completed by King Heinrich's work and let the SS rule the new Aryan Empire. He made lots of pilgrimages to King Heinrich's tomb. Life of Hitler. The occult life of Hitler. The summary of Hitler's early life would be failure. He lived on his dead mother's savings and an orphan's pension which came from his father's service to the customs department. He wanted to become an artist, but was refused to enter the art school due to he weren't up to the standards required, so he spent his days doing nothing for quite a while. Hitler became angry at God and society due to where life had led him, so he rebelled against God and society. In his quest for power, he turned his mind to the occult. He spent all of his free time in the Hofburg Library in Vienna reading books about the history of the occult and Eastern religions. The occult seemed to be the solution to the disappointments in young Hitler's life. In that same library, there was an ancient spear, believed by many to be the one used to pierce the side of Jesus Christ. By coincidence, he overheard a tour group guide point out the spear and say, "This spear is shrouded in mystery. Whoever unlocks its secrets will rule the world." Hitler said later that those words changed his whole life. He believed the spear was possessed by secret occult powers and invited these powers to invade his soul. There is an eyewitness, a certain Dr. Walter Steen, who stood beside his 20-year-old Hitler when he gazed at the spear. Adolf Hitler stood like a man in a trance, a man over whom some dreadful magic spell had been cast. He was swaying on his feet as he caught up in totally unexplicable euphoria. His whole facial appearance, physiognomy, and stance appeared transformed as if some mighty spirit now inhabited his very soul, creating within and around him a kind of evil transformation of its own nature and power, the Spear of Destiny. Hitler was enthusiastic enough to enhance his occult powers further. He was already using some meditation techniques he learnt back in the East, but that was too slow a progress for him. Ernest Pretsch, a book dealer, introduced Hitler to a psychedelic drug containing mescaline and peyote. This produced clairvoyant visions that made Hitler believe he had opened the door to the reigns of supernatural powers, powers he could use for his own purposes. 4 years later, Hitler went from Vienna to Munich. There he got involved with others who had done the same dedication to occult powers. One of them was Eckhart, the true Satanist. He was probably the man who influenced Hitler the most. By taking on Eckhart's occult practices, Hitler became totally demonized. From this point on, he had indeed demonic powers. In fact, Eckhart told him that he himself was on a mission to prepare the vessel of the Antichrist, the man who would be inspired by Lucifer to conquer the world and lead the Aryan race to pride and glory. Hitler knew he was that man. Hitler believed he was in contact with this superior mythical race, taught about it in the Thule Society, and he was the one to lead the Aryans to rule the world. Eckhart, just like Hitler, also had reached his psychic abilities by taking mind-altering drugs, like peyote. He was also a heroin addict. He was certain he was the reincarnation of Bernard of Barcelona, a notorious betrayer of Christianity and a black magician whose thaumaturgy to hold off Carolingian armies in Spain in the 9th century. Ravenscroft, in Spear of Destiny, writes that Hitler had been prepared for satanic initiation by his experiences in Vienna with peyote and the spear and by the mustard gassing in 1918, which made him blind and in a state of enforced trance for many days. He also states that the techniques of Eckhart were part derived from the sex magic of Aleister Crowley. In fact, in 1912, Crowley was named IX, the ninth British head of secret Berlin lodge called Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, which practiced various forms of sexual magic. Ravenscroft continues, there can be little doubt that both Crowley and Eckhart conducted deep studies of the Arabian astrological magic performed by Kligsner's real-life counterpart, Landulf II. Landulf fled to Sicily after his traitorous links to Islam were disclosed, and it was in the dark tower in the mountains of the southwest corner of the island that his evil soul festered with additional bitterness over his castration by the relatives of a noblewoman he had raped. There he practiced Satanism of a nature that foreshadowed the horror of the Nazi concentration camps. It was from his studies of such practitioners that Eckhart devised the rituals he used when he opened the centers of Adolf Hitler to give him a vision and a means of communication with the powers. Having done his worst, Eckhart eventually died, proudly advising those around him to follow Hitler. Our Father Adolf, who art on earth, hallowed be thy name. The Third Reich come. Hitler had put himself in the place of God and wanted people to worship him. One should not underestimate the occult influences on Hitler. His subsequent rejection of Freemasons and esoteric movements of theosophy and anthroposophy don't necessarily mean otherwise. Occult circles have long been known as cover-ups for espionage. Hitler's spy apparatus under Canaris of Heydrich were well aware of these conduits, particularly from the direction of Britain, which had within its MI5 intelligence agency a department known as the Occult Bureau. These potential sources of trouble were purged from Nazi life should not be taken to mean that Hitler and Nazi secret societies were not influenced by mystical writers, as Madame Blavatsky, Chamberlain von List, Lanslon Feebles, and Rudolf Steiner, George Gurdjieff, Karl Hoshoff, Theodor Fritsch. Although Hitler later ridiculed many of them, he dedicated his book Mein Kampf to his teacher Dietrich Eckhart. It's also known that Aleister Crowley sought contact with Hitler. Hitler's unusual powers maybe now can be better understood if one keeps in mind that he had access to the secret psychological techniques of the esoteric lodges. So, this Mein Kampf was dedicated to this Dietrich Eckhart, and it is well documented of Hitler's esoteric endeavors. So, the Third Reich, a couple key points, obviously, is they're anti-Semitic and believe that the Jews are an alien race. They also believe that they come from this root race of Atlanteans. And it's very clear of Himmler's involvement with the sending, expedition parties everywhere. Tibet, Antarctica, China, Africa, India, all over to the sacred sites. It's very obvious of their occult influence, and everything that was done by them was basically to attain a state of higher being. That's the whole premise that the Aryans were set on, was this Blavatsky, um, and the idea that we come from a race of beings that are pure light and have fallen to this state of low consciousness. And they basically came up with this idea of eugenics to do away with all the the inferior races. So understanding that these secret societies, such as the Illuminati, and all of the Thule Society, all of the secret orders, the Anunnaki, they stem from this belief. They stem from this occult knowledge. These are all occult practices that come from the sacred, the mystery schools in Egypt. But another interesting thing to note is that this man named the new society the New Templars, and that's obviously in regard to the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar were, as many people know, reported to have smuggled secret knowledge that was hidden underneath Solomon's temple.